our country continues to be torn apart at so many levels by this insane behavior coming out of the Republican Party. It's just, it is, and Fox News and right-wing hate radio. Let me just provide you with a beginning point for all this. The Federal Reserve just released statistics about who's getting rich and how in the United States. And a reporter, actually a guy with the Economic Policy Institute, did an analysis of this and found that if this current trend, which began with Reagan, right? Keep in mind, from World War II until the 1980s, during that period of time, the middle class, the wealth of the middle class and the income of the middle class, you know, wealth is everything you own, income is your paycheck. Both the wealth of the middle class and the income of the middle class grew more rapidly than the wealth or income of the top 10%. And people in poverty were accumulating wealth and income at a higher rate than were the very rich. I mean, the very rich were getting rich, make no mistake about it. And, you know, in terms of absolute dollars, of course, they were making more than the middle class or the poor. But the middle class and the poor were actually growing really rapidly. And a lot of this was because of the labor movement. You know, it was a really substantial thing. So here we are. So then Reagan comes along in 1980. Reagan comes along in 1980 and starts this new program. He says, you know, we're gonna take this whole Keynesian economics model, which back in 1776, Adam Smith laid out in Wealth of Nations and said, this is how it works, right? This and Theory of Moral Sentiments, his two major books. We're going to take this Keynesian model of economics and we're going to throw it away. And we're going to take this country back to feudalism, back to where the rich own everything, including the workers. And he completely rejected Keynesianism and said, no, this is trickle-down economics. We're going to go back to horse and sparrow economics, is what it was called in the late 1800s, when it was being sold as, well, if you feed the big fat horses even more oats, there'll be a little more left over in their poop for the sparrows. It was literally the sales pitch. This was before cars. Reagan reinvented it as, you know, some will trickle down. But what this economist found was that at this rate, right, this trend line that changed with the Reagan presidency in the early 1980s, used to be the middle class was getting wealthier every single year. Kids knew that they would do better than their parents. Parents knew that they were doing better than their grandparents. The middle class was strong and healthy and prosperous. A black middle class was emerging rapidly, particularly after the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act and after Brown v. Board, you know, in the 50s and 60s. This was everything was moving in a positive direction right up until the 1980s. And then Reagan said, we're going to kill the unions because they're a major source of funding for the Democratic Party. He would have called it the Democrat Party because they don't believe in actually, you know, saying what the name of the Democratic Party is. It just sounds too nice. You know, it sounds democratic. So you call it the Democrat Party and emphasize the rat. That was Joe McCarthy's sales pitch back in the day. So he changes this. And what happens? The middle class starts to lose their wealth. I mean, the middle class just starts to fall apart. Very, very straightforward process. It's, you know, it shouldn't surprise anybody. I mean, from 1989, which was, I guess, it was the first year of the Bush Jr. presidency. So, you know, functionally the last year of the Reagan presidency. Bush Sr. was sworn into office in January of '89. So from the last year of the Reagan presidency until 2018, the bottom half of Americans lost $900 billion in wealth, in the actual wealth that they have. At the same time, the top 1% increased their wealth by $21 trillion. So they weren't happy just to have the $20 trillion that they got. They also reached into your pocket and mine and took an extra $900 billion. So now we have the situation today where 400 Americans own more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans. But if you look at the stats from the Fed, and this is where it just gets mind-boggling. I mean, the Dallas Morning News finance columnist Scott Burns wrote this up, but it's based on information from the Fed. He said, here are the basics. From 2013 to 2016, the top 10% of households increased their share of total wealth from an amazing 75.3% to a stunning 77.2%. That's a share gain of 1.87% in just 3 years. In other words, if they continue to gain share at that rate, in other words, if the rich continue to get richer and richer at the expense of the poor and the middle class, if they continue to gain share at that rate, they will have the remaining 22.8% of net worth held by the other 90% in just 12 more surveys. 12, each survey is 2 years. Excuse me, 3 years. So in 33 years, the top 10% of Americans will own 100% of all the wealth in the country. 100%. This is the trend line for Reaganomics. Everyone else is going to be the bottom 90%. Everyone else is going to have net negative. As is the case for the majority. The bottom 40% of Americans own nothing. They are in debt. They have student loans. They have credit cards. They have mortgages, but none of it exceeds their asset base, the value of their home or their cars and things. And right now, right-wing billionaires like Donald Trump are cheering this on. They're calling for more tax cuts on rich people, less power for working people through the continuing destruction of unions, and fighting things like the minimum wage. They tell us the problem isn't corporate monopoly or the rich taking everything for themselves. Oh, no, that's not the problem. Don't look over there. Don't look at the Walton family, just the Walton family, having more wealth than the bottom 40% of Americans. Don't look at that. No. It's those brown people coming from south of the border. It's those black people who want to take your jobs, white people. It's black people wanting affirmative action. They want to step up. They want reparations. And it's women wanting equality in the workplace. The people that Limbaugh calls feminazis. These people, these Republican toadies for the top 1% and the corporations that made them that way, these Republican toadies are more than willing to tear up the fabric of American society. I mean, look at how billionaire Trump has been doing this. How billionaire DeVos, the education secretary, is tearing up our schools. How billionaire Wilbur Ross, our commerce secretary, is trying to tear up the American workplace. They're more than willing to do this for what they think will be a permanent position of wealth and power. If we can just wipe out the middle class, that pesky middle class. You'll recall back in 1951, and Russell Kirk wrote The Conservative Mind, the book that galvanized Barry Goldwater, that woke up William F. Buckley, that created the modern conservative movement. And the main point of that book, I was reading that book this weekend. Russell Kirk's The Conservative Mind, 1951. The main point of that book was that if the middle class, now keep in mind, 1951, the middle class was just emerging. The main point of that book was if the middle class ever gets wealthy enough, you are going to see minorities start demanding rights. You are going to see women in rebellion. You're going to see young people who are talking back to their elders and being promiscuous. You're going to see the decay of the American family and the destruction of American society. That was his sales pitch. The remedy? Reaganomics. Destroy the middle class. And that's exactly what they did. But the result has not been an increase in stability in America. The result has been people who formerly thought, hey, I'll have a better life than my parents did. That's the way things go, right? Instead, those people are now saying, I'm having to live in my parents' basement. Why is that? Oh, Donald Trump tells me it's because brown people are coming across the border. Or because black people are being catapulted over me in an application for college. They're fueling class resentment. They're fueling regional resentment. Oh, it's those people in the cities. Remember Trump last week attacking the cities? Rural America is like, oh, we're the victims of the cities? This was the sales pitch in the South, by the way, by the Southern politicians who were arguing for secession. Who are the bad guys? Who was hurting the South? Oh, it wasn't the cotton gin. Actually, that was one of the major things that deformed the economy of the South in the 1830s. But no, it wasn't that. It was the New York bankers, right? The war between the war against the northern bankers, right? They're fueling class resentment, they're fueling regional resentment, and then the cherry on the top of the cake. I mean, without this racial resentment. And they're using that resentment to split us apart so we won't notice that they are picking our pockets. They are encouraging us to hate each other, so we will point our fingers at each other instead of at them. This is nuts. And we need to call it out for what it is.